Health and Wellness Minister Dr. Christopher Tufton says there are no reports of any Jamaicans suffering from rare side effects of this Astrazeneca COVID-19 vaccine. His comments come after the vaccine was withdrawn by its manufacturer. Its makers have cited low demand for pulling the vaccine. However, several news agencies have carried reports linking the withdrawal of the vaccine to side effects that include blood clots. Mahiri Stewart has more in that report.
Concern about the withdrawal of the vaccine was put to the Health and Wellness Minister and the country's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jacqueline Bissacer Mackenzie, at Wednesday's post-cabinet media briefing. Dr. Tufton told members of the media that the vaccine was not withdrawn internationally because of the side effects. He says the interpretation of the withdrawal has been misinterpreted by many.
When AstraZeneca sent out the notification, it was a notification to discontinue production, and there seemed to have been some interpretation or extreme interpretation that it was a notification based on a recognition maybe that the vaccine somehow was going to create an adverse reaction to people who have taken it. The dialogue around it in the country, and unfortunately some have sort of exaggerated it. Sometimes we got interpretations around this that created an extreme view, and I think it's unfortunate because it's not our intention to make the public panic around these issues.
Minister Tufton says the side effects were detected in the affected persons within 3 months of them taking it. He says the likelihood of any Jamaican suffering from those side effects is near impossible given the vaccine's withdrawal from Jamaica.
The vaccine was known to come with side effects in a very small percentage of times. Those side effects will be most noted within 3 months of taking the vaccine. And I'm looking here on the report. There are no reports to date of any cases in Jamaica of Jamaicans suffering that side effect, that rare side effect involving the AstraZeneca. So we have clinically on record no report of, and those who would have taken would be highly unlikely, if not impossible, to have that side effect now, years after taking the vaccine, and we no longer are distributing the vaccine. So I think that's clear.
And Dr. Bissacer Mackenzie says the clotting side effects associated with the AstraZeneca vaccine have been discovered in a very small number of people who have taken the shot.
This complication is extremely rare, occurring in about 2 per 100,000 persons, where there is an association of the formation of clots. And within that group of persons that can have this effect, then of course you will have a small percentage of persons that will have serious outcomes.
Mahiri Stewart for Nationwide News.
Thank you so much, Mahiri. And we're now being joined by the country's Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jacqueline Bissacer Mackenzie. Good morning to you.
Good morning, CMO.
Hi, good morning.
Morning
to your listeners.
Thank you so much for joining us here on Nationwide this morning. CMO, first question to you. Did Jamaica exhaust the validation process in a move to ensure that AstraZeneca was safe for administering? Talk to us about the approach.
You take me back many years.
I know.
But, we have always stuck to the point that we were not going to register with emergency approval any vaccine that had not gone through the process and was not on the WHO's list of approved vaccines. And we know that that process took quite a long time for many vaccines. We came under a lot of pressure because there were countries within our region that were using vaccines that were not yet approved. And because people wanted the vaccine here, they wanted us to take these unapproved vaccines. We were under a lot of pressure as well for the vaccines from Cuba. And because of that same process, which was not completed, we did not take any vaccines that hadn't gone through that rigorous process.
Right. So any vaccine that came here essentially went through the rigorous process and was approved. Yes, Madam Simo? Right. And we stopped taking AstraZeneca AstraZeneca was no longer distributed in Jamaica by the ministry in and around July 2022? Just want your confirmation on that.
I think we got a small amount in May 2022. It had an expiry date of July 2022, so we would have discontinued use.
And we discontinued use after July 2022.
Yeah.
And based on your numbers, Madam CMO, hopefully you do have it, how many Jamaicans would have been vaccinated with the AstraZeneca vaccine?
I don't have the numbers of how many, but what I can say is that we have administered over 1.5 million doses of vaccine, and about 60% of those were AstraZeneca doses. Many of the persons that would have gotten the first and the second dose for AstraZeneca would have ended up getting a booster with Pfizer, because by the time we were giving boosters, we did not have the availability of AstraZeneca, and there was approval for the recommendations was that we could use the Pfizer vaccine or the Moderna vaccine. As a matter of fact, any of the other vaccines as the booster. So you would have found that persons in Jamaica would have had more than likely a first and second dose of AstraZeneca and a booster of one of the other vaccines.
Want to understand something, Madam CMO, as it relates to side effects, because based on reports in other countries, of course, persons who turned up with the side effects or the rare effects, it was within 2, 3, 4 months of taking the vaccine. In that case, then, isn't it fair to say that if anyone, any Jamaican or any person vaccinated here would have had those rare or side effects, it would have already come to the fore?
Yes. We would expect that persons would have already presented. When any drug is released after the initial clinical trials, there are only certain amount of things you're going to detect in the clinical trials, because the clinical trials go on for a particular period of time before the vaccine or any drug is released. And so you don't have all the information that would happen years after. So after drugs are released, there is a period of post-market surveillance where authorities continue to monitor, and they invite persons who, having taken the drug, if there's anything at all that happens to them, whether it may be related to the drug or not, to report it, so that we can have an idea of what are the reports coming in, and then we can try to establish whether there is any causal relationship between that event and the drug itself. So the post-market surveillance period for AstraZeneca would have shown that persons did develop this very rare side effect of clots. And that would have been in the media I would say, by the second quarter of 2021. And there was an alarm, of course, in country, and we had to respond to say, yes, it was that these side effects were detected, but they were extremely rare, and the benefits in terms of, persons, protecting persons from serious illnesses and death due to COVID was far exceeded. But having had the information that this was indeed a possibility, persons would have made their choice. Many persons chose to wait until the Pfizer vaccine became available. But many persons took what was available, because at that time, of course, what was available was best. We have 1 in 2 Jamaicans that are obese, 1 in 3 that have hypertension, 1 in 8 that have diabetes. So we have a vulnerable population who were at risk for serious illness with COVID. And we've had over 3,000 deaths from COVID. And we would think that the introduction of the vaccine early would have protected many more persons from serious illnesses and death.
having a conversation with the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jacqueline Besesa McKenzie, about the AstraZeneca vaccine. Yesterday, we heard from Dr. Besesa McKenzie as well as the Health Minister, Dr. Christopher Tufton, where they spoke at the post-cabinet press briefing and did tell the country that there are no reports of any Jamaican suffering from rare side effects of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine. We're also hearing from Dr. Besesa McKenzie that the Health Ministry, the government, went through all of the stages in terms of validation to ensure that the AstraZeneca was an approved vaccine by the World Health Organization before any vaccines, any AstraZeneca, was administered to Jamaicans during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also indicating that we had stopped administering AstraZeneca in about July CMO 2022.
Yes, that's
Is
correct.
when we administered the last set of AstraZeneca. In a statement that came out from the opposition spokesperson on health, he had said, Dr. Alfred Dawes, people are wondering what this means for them if they took this and other vaccines, if there are any long-term side effects that may develop as time goes by. He says many healthcare workers and ordinary Jamaicans who advocated for persons to take the vaccines in order to protect themselves are now left in a precarious situation where anti-vaxxers are claiming victory and threatening to undo the success of vaccination campaigns involving traditional vaccines. What do you make of that statement by the opposition spokesperson?
I think we have to be very careful that we don't feed the thought that vaccines are not good. I mean, we have been using vaccines for many, many years, and the benefits in terms of eradication of polio, eradication of measles, mumps, and rubella, these things are very, very real. I mean, I know people from the 1960s who would have had polio, and not something that we want to go back. And we see with the vaccine coverage having declined across the world in different countries, we start to see the rise in some of those diseases. Again, diphtheria, pertussis, polio. We're seeing cases across the world, and within our own region, we're seeing new cases. Fortunately, we have maintained very good vaccination rates, and so we are very confident in our protection of our population, and we encourage persons who have not received their childhood vaccines to ensure that they receive them. The fact is that the vaccines for COVID were new vaccines, and, the surveillance continues. I think that it is very hard at this point to establish causal relationship between the vaccine and anything that could happen to somebody 5-10 years later. And what we have to follow are the trends in terms of mortality rates, morbidity, to see if we see anything that is coming that is increasing or so, to try to see, but it will be very, very difficult to establish those relationships, especially since we do have persons dying from many, many things, in the normal course of things. But we had the post-market surveillance, and we continue to take reports from persons. And what we try to do in the investigation is to see if there is any real relationship between the vaccine and the event that is described by the person. Most of the things that we would have seen are things like headache, weakness, a rise in blood pressure, a fall in blood pressure, those things that would have subsided. So those are most of the events that would have been described by persons. We have not had any persons, any diagnosis of SOS. Mm-hmm. So, we continue to receive reports. I mean, even if something had happened years ago, we will take the reports and investigate. but it's unlikely that an event is going to happen now as a result of taking the vaccine when the side effect, that rare side effect, is usually between 3 to 30 days.
Right. Those side effects would show up, appear 3 to 30 days.
Yeah.
CMO, of course, AstraZeneca no longer being administered, but are people still coming forward to get the other COVID vaccines?
We do have some persons that are coming to get boosters. We do encourage the elderly persons who are vulnerable, to be vaccinated. Across the world, I think that the COVID-19 vaccine is being incorporated into the routine schedule of immunization. As time evolves, we may see it being incorporated in something like the flu vaccine. We wait to see, but yes, we do have doses of Pfizer available, and some persons, very few persons really, are coming forward to get their booster. And I think especially persons who may be traveling, who think they may be placing themselves in vulnerable positions, may, be getting the booster. The fact is, though, that when you travel nowadays, you see a lot more people taking precautions, a lot more people wearing masks in the airports, especially in the flu season, when you do hear people coughing, sneezing. I think people are generally more careful, and I would encourage people to do that. Jamaica is in a position where we will see the effects of the flu season from the north and the flu season from the south. And so while we pass through the flu season from the north, which is usually in the latter part of the year, coming into the early part, then we have the flu season from the south, which usually happens after that. So persons do try to protect themselves, and there are other precautions apart from the vaccine to ensure, you hand sanitation, make sure you wear your mask. If you have symptoms, try to stay home, treat them early. Of course, if you're not getting better, to see your healthcare provider, because these illnesses can result in very serious illnesses and even death.
And for those who have not gotten the booster shot and are still considering getting it, it's available in all our public health facilities or selected?
In our health centers, yes. In all health centers.
Okay. Is the health ministry considering as well? You mentioned that you have some countries that are putting the COVID-19 vaccine into the immunization schedule. That's something being considered by us as well?
As it is with the flu vaccine, where it is a seasonal vaccine, and we advise persons to take it during the season because the protection varies. I mean, the type of strains of the flu virus that it covers varies year to year, and you will get a new vaccine. So I think that it probably may not end up in a routine schedule, but may end up in a kind of a seasonal offering, as time goes on.
Mm-hmm. And based on the information, Madam CMO, that's been going around, hopefully a clarification holds root. But are you of the view that we'll have persons who are not yet vaccinated with the COVID-19 vaccine coming forward here and now to get that vaccination?
I'm not going to be able to give you that information right now in terms of whether we have new vaccinations happening. I would have to interrogate that information to see. I think, though, that most people are coming for boosters.
Very well.
The country's CMO, Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Jacqueline Besaso-McKenzie, talking to us this morning and providing more clarity if you missed yesterday's post-cabinet press briefing as well as our newscast about the AstraZeneca vaccine. Dr. Besaso-McKenzie, thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
So we're still on the front page, but we're turning our eyes now to the constitutional reform process and its stalemate. I'll put that in inverted commas. Prime Minister Andrew Holness says he's disappointed with the position of the opposition leader Mark Golding, that the PNP will not support the ongoing constitutional reform process if there's no agreement on establishing the Caribbean Court of Justice, CCJ, as Jamaica's final appellate court. Speaking at this morning's post-cabinet, yesterday's morning's post-cabinet press briefing, the Prime Minister told the journalist that while he's disappointed, he's not surprised.
The Prime Minister made a surprise appearance at the briefing held at Jamaica House and left immediately after his remarks. The posture of the opposition leader is causing uncertainty about the reform process going forward. Mr. Golding instructed the opposition appointees on the Constitutional Reform Committee, CRC, to not sign the report prepared by the committee. That report has been submitted to Cabinet. According to the Prime Minister, he expected this move from Mark Golding. Mr. Holness repeated his claim that there was an understanding with the opposition leader before the CRC began its deliberations that the reform process would be done in phases. This was done during the Vale Royal talks with the opposition leader.
The Prime Minister says based on those talks, he was of the view that the work of the CRC would proceed in good faith. The Prime Minister says notwithstanding the posture of an opposition that's agitating for state power, the process towards constitutional reform will continue. For reactions, we're joined by public commentator and debater Jermaine Barrett and also another public commentator and a former Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives, Lloyd B. Smith. Good morning to you, gentlemen.
Good morning. Good morning to you.
Thank you so much for joining us on Nationwide this morning. Let me start with you, Lloyd B. This King's Counsel, you small said something as it relates to the political climate now, impending elections. He says it's probably wise for us to postpone at this point because we need national consensus, and that can't be arrived at in a political heavy climate, especially so close to the elections. What do you make of that statement from the King's Counsel, Lloyd B?
I think that was the most judicious and practical statement. We tend not to be students of history, but those of us who are older will recall that after the West Indies Federation referendum was held, and it was pushed by Bustamante of the JLP, Norman Manley, who was in power at the time, did the gentleman-like thing to call an election so that the people could decide on the road to independence. And it is safe to say that from there on, both Bustamante and Manley were, more or less in sync with the idea of Jamaica moving to become fully independent and so on. In this current scenario, I think the unfortunate thing is that too much partisan political color has been attached to the committee. Frankly, I think it should be disbanded and a new committee be established. This one is not going to go anywhere in a hurry. I tell you why. Where we have reached now, there has to be a decision whether you're going to do a holistic type approach or you're going to do this piecemeal approach. I, for one, prefer the holistic approach, because when you move into this piecemeal approach where today you deal with one thing and tomorrow you deal with another thing, you're stretching out the thing ad infinitum and creating all kinds of problems along the way.
But who has caused that problem, though, Lloyd B. Smith? Because it was agreed, we said in the run-up that the Vale Royal talks were had, and it was agreed that the deliberations on the matters would be done in phases. The first phase, which we are now in, would be on the monarch, and then the second phase would focus, for example, on the final appellate court.
Or an understanding at the very least.
Yeah, but those were just words. I don't think the reality what we are seeing now is what is unfolding, quite frankly. I cannot accept the fact that Mr. Golding would be so devious as to be going off on a political one-upmanship stance. I do believe that the elephant in the room that has always been the Caribbean Appellate Court should have been up front from day one and not be a sidebar, because it is one of the most controversial issues relating to the whole matter of Jamaica becoming a republic.
But
And-
let me ask you, Lloyd B, because you said the Constitutional Committee should be disbanded in your view. But that does not solve the elephant in the room. It doesn't.
It may not solve it, but it would give the country a new start. Right now, what we are seeing is.
But do we really need a new start, though, Lloyd B, given where we are in the process?
Yes, but let me tell you-
wouldn't
let me tell you
fixes
something.
rehabilitate the process or further enhance it?
We mustn't be naive. We mustn't be politically naive, you know. The harsh reality right now is that many persons are looking at constitutional reform either through green spectacles or orange spectacles. And that ought not to have been the route that should have been taken. This is a Jamaica issue, not a JLP issue, not a PMP issue, not a wholeness issue, not a Golding issue. It has now become that.
I want to go to Jermaine Barrett, but before I come to you, Jermaine, so how differently would you constitute the CRC than how it is constituted now?
I believe that a lot of behind the scenes negotiations should have taken place before going public, right? You know, so that at least some hurdles would have been cleared and understood, which could have been encapsulated within the structure of the Vale Royal talks. Right?
Okay, but
Hold on.
as to the structure of the committee itself, because you said this band the committee, you know, how would that committee be structured differently in your
Because
word?
the current committee is a Tower of Babel. We have members of the committee speaking different languages.
I see.
We see you small coming out and saying one thing. We see Nadine Spence coming out saying another thing. Malawi Ford saying another thing. No, it has become convoluted.
Jermaine Barrett, your reaction to Usman's comment as it relates to waiting until after an election to have the political season die down a bit because of the national consensus needed to go forward?
It pains me greatly that we as a country can't be mature enough to do the things on which there is consensus. There is bipartisan consensus, there's consensus across the society that we need to move from the British monarchy. Yes, we need to repatriate our sovereignty. That is clear. What is not clear is whether or not we should move to the CCJ, abandoning the Privy Council, right? Now, let us be clear. I hear my colleague commentator here saying that maybe what we should be doing is pursuing a wholesome and a holistic approach to this constitutional reform process. I'm not sure I'm understanding what that really entails or how that looks like. The constitutional reform process is a necessarily cumbersome and laborious process. Mm-hmm. And how you treat with such situations is to phase it, is to sort of approach it piecemeal. So even the characterization of it as being piecemeal is, in my estimation, not an inherently bad thing. You deal with the things that there's consensus on, you deal with the aspects that for which you need a referendum, and then you move on going forward. And I think that was, in my estimation, what the phased approach entails. I don't understand why it is that the opposition wouldn't have raised its concerns from the outset, yes, to the phased approach. How is it that we had a phased approach? The committee signed on to it effectively, the opposition seemingly signed on to it by virtue of them appointing their members to the committee, and then at this last minute, we're getting this big kerfuffle. I think it really smacks of a sense of immaturity amongst our political leaders. It is also very much concerning to me that the Prime Minister has not, for some time now, not been able to articulate a clear position as to what it is that the governing party's stance is on the CCJ or Privy Council. Mm-hmm. That is concerning. But I don't, even though that is concerning, I think we ought to have just waited a while, got to phase 2, and then we engage in this robust discourse. One of the things, the final point I'll make is this, that I think it's a bit naive to think that we would effectively kill the process now and then restart when after we've transitioned to a new government. The fact is, these wounds that are being inflicted on the parties are going to last for some time to come. And I anticipate that the Jamaica Labour Party, now in government, were they to lose power and become the opposition next time, it's not going to be that they're going to walk hand in hand with the opposition when the opposition takes reins and pursues constitutional reform. So we have to be clear about that.
Yeah. And where your mind is at, Jermaine, the Prime Minister said yesterday that notwithstanding the posture of the opposition agitating for state power, that the process towards constitutional reform will continue. He said that, they'll continue to seek consensus. The right approach to take at this time.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that's probably a little idealistic and probably inspiring hope in people like myself who just feel completely despondent and dejected in the process overall.
Mm-hmm.
But the process necessarily requires bipartisan support. There's going to be a bill laid before the Parliament that requires sort of a 2/3 majority. Certainly when we get to the Senate, that is going to require opposition support, right? So for this to really get to any meaningful conclusion, at least phase one, we need the opposition.
And that's what Bruce Golding says as well. And that's what Bruce Golding says as well.
Yes.
That without the national consensus, it makes no sense. So given
Yes.
given what has been outlined by you gentlemen as the context here and what is taking place, ultimately with this stalemate, do we press on with the current state of affairs, or do we say let's wait until the election dies down? I got an answer from Lloyd B. Wanted one from you based on what Bruce Golding and King's Counsel Small had said. Ultimately, what do you suggest at this point in time?
I'm not there yet. I would want to see us make some progress on phase one.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe pause the process as we edge closer to the election, and then we'll resume thereafter. And so I think clearly we are at a stage where the process has been stalled. And so for us to re-engage the process, there needs to be some serious discussions, a lot of those gentlemen in a room, and have exhaustive discussions and deliberations between the two of them until, in the national interest, we can eke out some kind of consensus.
And as it relates to the criticism of consultation and having more consultations, what's your reaction to that?
Yes, I mean, there's definitely a need for more consultation. I'm troubled by the fact that the constitutional reform and the educational arm of it, the subcommittee tasked with public education, has done some work, but not anywhere near enough. I'm also concerned as well by the fact that we've seen civil society really, really working hard to push the committee to become far more transparent and open. I don't know why is it that a committee of this nature, that its meetings can't be publicly presented for public consumption. We have all sorts of other committees in the Parliament and elsewhere that is, you can, go on YouTube or watch it on television or wherever it is. Something as centrally important as this need that kind of public conversation going from the start all the way through to the end. We can't have a situation continuing where, we have to fight to get the minutes, and when we get the minutes are not even comprehensive and they're coming late. All of that really does a disservice to the importance of this process we call constitutional reform.
And on that matter as well, Lloyd B. Smith, as we wrap, should those deliberations, should they have been made public? I mean, Jermaine said they're technical, cumbersome. There's a lot of back and forth before you really get to all of the recommendations that's coming to the floor of the Parliament. Should all of that and the recommendations have been made public before coming to the floor of the Parliament?
I don't necessarily think so. Maybe some of them, but not all. The more sensitive ones perhaps could have been held back, because we continue to fool ourselves that the wider public is sufficiently engaged in this exercise. They are not. The average Jamaican out there is only reference point of the difference between the CCJ and the Privy Council. We see the Vibes Cartel issue. And I have a gut feeling that if you were to have a referendum right now, a lot of Jamaicans would vote to keep the Privy Council because of what happened with the Vibes Cartel issue. You better believe it.
Yeah.
And there's the Buggery law. And so the fact of the matter is that we are not approaching this thing from ground level up. We are approaching it from top level down. And that's not going to work. We have a society where there are many Jamaicans who are semi-literate or illiterate. They do not have sufficient understanding of how government works. right? And we are fooling ourselves if we continue to intellectualize this constitutional reform process as if it is something that is going to end up being presented to us out of heaven on a platter. No, there are a lot of drilling down needs to be done, and it's not being done.
Just to jump in here, I don't think
Giving you the final word, Jermaine.
Thank you. I don't think we sustain any harm from making the deliberations truly public. Yes, Jamaicans are not necessarily, by and large, able to engage in technical sort of legalese, but certainly there's a robust civil society community. There are people like thought leaders like ourselves here who help to transmit and break down the information. I think a far more robust discussion could have been had coming out of the deliberations of the CRC, were those deliberations made public. I think when we talk about transparency and open government and governance, this is what that essentially is all about. Don't think that the Jamaican people aren't smart enough to engage before we lock them out of the process. I don't agree with that.
I agree with you right there, Jermaine. Jermaine Barrett, public commentator and debater, also Lloyd B. Smith, public commentator and former Deputy Speaker of the House of Representatives. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us.
Have a good day.
Good. Really and truly, we need to stop this idea of thinking that Jamaican people do not understand certain things. Yeah, the technicalities and the legalese might be a difficulty, yes, but I think they understand way more than we make them out to.